spent on big fundraising events like marathons and gala dinners are suffering enormously during the COVID-19 lockdown. At the same time, we have seen some tremendous fundraising efforts led by Sir Tom Moore, of course. And they've raised so much money, which indicates that people really do want to give. But how do you go about it? Joining me today to discuss the ins and outs of philanthropy and giving is Theresa Lloyd, a leading advisor to families on strategic philanthropy and also to charities seeking to develop long-term relationships with donors. She's also the author of several books, the most recent of which is Richer Lives. Welcome, Theresa. Thank you for joining me today. So, Theresa, as we have seen recently, giving is on a lot of people's minds, but there's so many charities, and how do we choose?
Well, I think the key questions to ask is, do I and my family care passionately about this? And do I think that this issue, and do I think that this particular organization is very well placed, is effectively managed at addressing the issue? So it's, do I care about it, and are they good at it? And if I don't know this organization at all yet, am I being introduced to it by somebody I know, somebody I respect, who is themselves a supporter? I think in a nutshell.
One sore point for many is how much charities spend on administration. Does that really matter?
Oh, I understand the concern, but I think it's the wrong question to ask. I think the most important thing is how effective the charity is at reaching and helping the beneficiaries it exists to support, both in the immediate term and in the longer term. So that means they have to spend money on things like monitoring their activities, learning what works and what doesn't, being accountable to and reporting to the funders on the impact, good financial management, recruiting and training the right staff, proper governance, trustees and so on, and investing in fundraising, which costs money, we might come back to that now and in the future. And of course, some causes are much more popular than others, and the hard to promote causes find it harder to raise money.
Many have criticised the website justgiving.com for levying a fee of £308,000 on the Sir Tom Moore fundraise of $33 million. Actually, I think a bit more than that now. What are your views?
I'm not an expert in this area, but I think what I feel is that 300,000 is less than 1% of the total. In fact, I think it's now more than 33 million. And I suspect that Just Giving would say all our users are charities, every single one of them. And it's not for us, perhaps, to choose between causes. And they can't operate without charging. That's what they do. And they have to provide an effective platform, the website. They have to make it easier for donors to give, to make sure the payments are secure, to manage gift aid, to presumably deal with the HMRC. So it's a huge amount of money for the sum, but I think given the service they provide, less than 1% is pretty good.
What role does family dynamics play in giving?
Well, it's important. It's as important here as in any other decision making. I think it's very important to involve partners, husband, wife, whatever. It's because usually, certainly significant giving is a family decision, not just one person. And it's also important to involve children, certainly teenagers. And indeed, I would say, and I know from my own research and working with families, that getting together to agree on giving, encouraging children to be involved, and indeed sometimes allocating almost a little box or pot to children to then be able to make a case for the charity that they care about, can be hugely important in inculcating family values, bringing a family together, and indeed in developing an appreciation of the challenges faced by so many other constituencies in society, and therefore the value of money. And indeed in an increasingly secular society, family giving, family philanthropy can help to develop the principles and ethics which in previous years were based on religious observation. And I think for the wealthy, wealthier, family philanthropy is very bound up with estate planning. I mean, it's part of the whole, it's not just a one-off decision. And for those without children, which, as we know, is an increasing proportion of the population, making charitable bequests to the organizations that they support and that have provided fulfillment and made a real difference to people about whom they care can be a real and lasting legacy that is actually about far more than money.
So what's your advice for charities seeking donations?
I think too many charities make mistakes when approaching the wealthy, especially after the publication of the rich list, which, as we know, has just happened this year. They don't spend money on research, and they actually sometimes waste time and money on a completely scattergun approach, just approaching people because they're rich. So they may think this person's got the capacity to give, but they don't necessarily know whether they're interested in the cause, may already be committed to other organizations in the same field. And quite separately, we know that right now, many people will be feeling much less secure than they were before for all sorts of reasons. And many wealthier families already have a charitable trust. And if they do, they often have very clear guidelines on a website, which says this is what we support, this is what we don't support, here's how to apply, and what information we need to have. But there's a lot of research from the Association of Charitable Foundations, which is a sort of umbrella body, which shows actually that too many applications fall at the first hurdle, because people, some charities, by no means all, but some, I'm afraid probably particularly smaller ones that have fewer resources, and they fail because charities ignore all that and say, oh, well, we're terrific and we'll apply anyway. And also, we talked earlier on that the donors should ask themselves, how effective is this organization? Charities don't provide evidence that they are effective. They don't monitor their, what they do. To them, it's self-evident that what they do is good. But increasingly nowadays, donors, whether they're individuals or bigger grant makers, look for some evidence that is indeed the case, because, as you said right at the beginning, there's so much choice. And occasionally charities apply for sums of money that they're clearly not equipped to handle. So a huge amount, which may represent a year's expenditure in one go. So I would say the advice to donors going back is to research the organizations you want to support, and to organize charities seeking funding, to research the donors, and if possible, to engage your trustees and existing networks to make introductions.
Thank you. And moving from that straight onto the Sunday Times Rich List, which you mentioned. The Sunday Times Rich List for this year devotes a section to giving. What are the main trends we see?
Well, it's very interesting. Higher education was mentioned a lot. And as we know, there's a long tradition of giving to centuries of people giving to higher education, particularly by people who've benefited from it. And they see this as the underpinning of their success and their career, and they want to give back. What we see on the Rich List is that there continues to be a major focus on funding education, and now particularly on focusing on higher education for the socially disadvantaged. It's a trend, it's been happening already. In our own research for Richer Lives, which you mentioned, we found that other than people setting up their own charitable trusts, higher education and the arts were the causes that received the most donations by value, and that some 40% of donors supported higher education to varying levels. So what we see now clearly is an increasing emphasis on focus on addressing the social mix, on widening participation, and on donations with strings attached, addressing that issue, the scholarships for a particular group of people. And another approach is that described in the Rich List by Peter Lampel, who in 1997 set up his the Sutton Trust, which precisely addresses, which is now, it says, helped more than 40,000 young people to get to top universities.
Amazing.
And similarly, if I could just say in the arts, I know from my own work that increasingly, it's an echo of this, that donors are increasingly interested in funding access by disadvantaged groups, tickets for the theatre, classes for education and outreach work, an increasing number of arts organisations doing this. Often it's work that doesn't hit the headlines, but more and more donors want to fund that rather than the more prominent activities. Just one interesting relevant thing for now, our research showed, this is several years ago now, that increasingly for newer, younger, wealthy people, health causes receive more than traditional health-related causes than traditional donors. And I assume that now this is a trend which will continue even more strongly.
What's the best way to go about supporting a local cause?
Well, I think for local charities, probably the best source of information would be community foundations, the local community foundations. There are over 45 around the country, different geographical areas. And their umbrella organisations is UK Community Foundations, and I believe you, Remi, are going to give details of their websites and of the other organisations that I mentioned at the end of the programme. So the thing about community foundations is that they have a number of local members already who support local causes. They undertake research into them. They provide advice on the practicalities of giving. They can undertake some of the admin for you if you want dealing with gift aid and that sort of thing. And very importantly, I think they can put you in touch with other donors who are interested in the same cause. And the reason I say that that's important is because collaborating with other donors can be hugely rewarding, because you're involved with like-minded people who care about the same things, and collective giving can make a bigger difference. Obviously.
That's good. Yes.
And if you want to support your local NHS trust or health generally, like Sir Tom to be more, you can either approach them directly, obviously the local hospital and so on, or you can give through NHS Charities Together, which is the sort of umbrella trust, which is actually the one that Sir Tom supported. And the National Emergencies Trust has launched a coronavirus appeal with the purpose of supporting grassroots organisations that are working with very vulnerable people all around the country. And interestingly, much of their support will be channeled through community foundations, and all those people have websites. And if you have an interest in a particular area, a particular cause, particular type of work, there'll almost certainly be some kind of umbrella organisation. For example, I'm passionately interested in music, and the Help Musicians UK has launched a hardship fund for musicians, because all the freelance musicians in all genres lost their work more or less overnight, and they've already had over 17,000 applications to this fund, so it shows how important it is.
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, we're going to show the details and links to all the charities and all the organizations you mentioned and resources. So we'll show them at the end of the program, and thanks very much for that. What are the practicalities that people need to think about in relation to philanthropy?
Well, this is a huge and complicated subject, and I mentioned legacies, so just to say it's very important to take advice when making a will, and there is a tax incentive. If you give more than 10% to charities, then your inheritance tax is reduced. There are many other practical considerations to do with gift aid. Most people will know about this, but essentially, if you're a higher rate taxpayer, a donation of £125, just to make the numbers easier, can be a net cost to you of £75. You can set up a charity account with the Charities Aid Foundations, and there are a number of organisations that advise on philanthropy and giving, including Philanthropy Impact and New Philanthropy Capital, whose websites will be at the end. The Charities Aid Foundations that I mentioned, they will certainly be able to cover this in more detail than I'm able to do at this point. And I believe you're going to have them invite somebody from there at a later session, which they will certainly be able to develop the advice on the practicalities.
And Theresa, a final word from you.
Well, I would say go for it. It's now more than ever, every pound will make a difference. Giving underpins the charities that actually, as we have seen, hold our communities together. They sustain the local community. And it's hugely rewarding for donors, which is why the strapline for my own activities, my own business, is richer lives for donors, richer lives for beneficiaries. And as others in my field have observed, you very seldom meet an ex-philanthropist.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Theresa, for joining us today. I'm sure we've all learned so much and are all much more clued up about philanthropy and giving. Thank you.
Subscribe now for more Family Wealth Guest Experts.